the last 20 years, I've worked on about two dozen different exhibits, and I'm going to be talking about the design considerations that go into maps that are part of an exhibit, but they're not supposed to distract from the exhibit. And those are called walk-by maps, but they just give somebody, as they're walking by, a quick idea of what's associated with what's on display, versus the other sort of maps where people are actually supposed to stop and study them. Doesn't always work, but sometimes we try. In our Geology, Gems, and Minerals Hall, we have the Dynamic Planet. We have, throughout all of our exhibits, we have mostly static maps. In this particular exhibit, we have about 30 maps, and again, mostly static, but we have some animated and some interactive. This one here is interactive, and people can identify the entire planet or particular zones of the planet to look at different volcanoes and earthquakes around the Earth, and it just does get a lot of attention from people. This one here, it's not a great screenshot, but it's also it's an animated map, and this was developed by NACIS Maps, and it's dealing with earthquakes and emissions over time from I think it's 1960 to 2017, and it gets a lot of people stop and watch it for the minute or so that it goes through the animation, and it's pretty instructive for people, and they enjoy that, and then they can also go online and see it as well. But then we have a number of static maps depicting plate boundaries, earthquakes, and continental drift. These, we don't expect people to stop and study. They just sort of look at them as they go along, especially the one dealing with Pangea. People barely even look at that one. But it does give people an idea of what the Earth was like at during a particular era. Lastly, as an example from this exhibit, we have a poster map, and this map is dated 2006. And it was a favorite of one of our late curators in the Mineral Sciences Department, and people come up and they look at this, and they may not stop and study it, but they can get an idea, and then they may go to our gift shop and buy a copy. It's jointly produced by both Smithsonian and USGS. Over in the African Voices Hall, this was a set of 20 maps I developed back in 2000. Basically give people a geographic education about the continent of Africa, and not treat it as a single country. Also, just because most people from our country don't know much about Africa. What is interesting is that the exhibits staff decided to put most of the maps at children's level. So a lot of the maps are sitting at about 3 feet off the ground. So the adults actually have to crouch to view these maps. So you get that sort of interaction. And so there's different maps that focus on different things. This one deals with dates of independence of countries around the continent. And then we've got one that I did on religious history, this one dealing with the spread of Islam across northern Africa. And focus on agriculture, the amount of rice growing. There's not, these maps are relatively simple. They're not meant to hold people's attention for too long, but they can get some ideas about what's going on. And then there's this particular map just identifying where particular, in this case, toys that are on display, what countries they come from. Now this map also was one of a number of maps. We don't update our maps, the static maps that is, that often in the exhibits, but this map and any other continental map that had Sudan in it was later, we later updated in 2011 when South Sudan became an independent country. So, so that does come into play occasionally. And then there's particular focuses on a particular part of the exhibit deals with a country. So here I'm just showing people, here you got the country of Malawi. And you'll have some artifacts that are on display to instruct people with that. Or it might be from a particular city. This is focusing on Benin City in Nigeria and just identifying what's going on there. Again, people wouldn't, you don't want to make it so complex that people are going to be looking at it for very long, but they do get an idea about what's going on and what, they'll be talking about the palace, and they might have something on display that comes from the palace, and so you'll know where exactly that particular artifact came from. Then in the Ocean Hall, this opened in 2006, and I spent about 2 years doing cartographic research for this hall, and because there's about 50 maps that were produced for this hall. And this is, we're pretty happy with what we've got on display in the hall. One of the most popular parts of the hall is Science on a Sphere that's put together by NOAA. And fortunately, they funded the entire this entire portion of the hall, and so because it's pretty expensive doing one of these Science on a Sphere setups. And this does not get updated very often. I think NOAA only puts in new data barely once a year or something like that. But then in other parts of the Ocean Hall, we have a number of 3D surface maps ranging from ocean-wide, in the North Atlantic to off the northeast coast to down to an individual seamount, this being Bear Seamount, that's off of New England, the New England seamount chain. And so people will stop and look at that, and they aren't aware that there are some volcanic seamounts that are off of New England, and so it's good instructions for them. But next to that is the next one, and this one, while the map that I did in the upper part is nice, what people interact with is the touch and feel map. This is a bronze rendition of the entire stripe that you see going down from the mid-Atlantic down into the Caribbean. And so people can actually take their fingers along it and feel where the Puerto Rican Trench is and other things. So that actually stops and gets a lot of people's attention. And then we have various other things to give people an idea of how invasive species spread around the world, primarily through, in the case of ocean species, through ships' ballast and whatnot. And we have a little discussion about that next to the map. And some people look at that for a short while, but not too long, because most people come through the museum relatively quickly. But then we have some simple maps, and this one's an animated conveyor belt, oceanic conveyor belt for the world, and it's nothing spectacular. It's pretty simple, but it does entertain children more so than adults, I think. And they like looking at it. In the middle of the Ocean Hall is a large right whale. Yeah, I see. And we have this map to go along with that, just to give people instructions about where the whales live, where they feed, where they mate, that sort of thing. And then we have a number of walk-by maps for where particular features are gathered. Obviously, again, pretty simple, large dots. Or I've got a set of 5 walk-by maps indicating, in this case, kelp forest, but I also got some in terms of volcanoes, salt marshes, mangroves, rocky shores, that sort of thing. And then toward the back of the Ocean Hall is some culture, a number of cultures dealing with Eastern Asia and North Americans, cultures that were dependent upon salmon, and people can stop and look at this for a while. And then we also have focus on a couple of marine protected areas. And people will stop and study that for a while, or they might look at the crash site. This is a magnetometer map of the Yucatan in Mexico, showing where the big impact crater was that killed off the dinosaurs. And then we have some things on chlorophyll, just to instruct the people, and focusing in on particular regions. And then to go faster, the Hall of Human Origins. These are 25 maps in this hall. It opened up in 2009. This is I have pretty much only walk-by maps in this hall. And again, just simple maps indicating where particular artifacts are from, or the migration of humans over time, or the distribution of Neanderthals. And then we've got some things like Smithsonian Institution Traveling Exhibition Service, or SITES, and I get involved with them. And they put this America on the Move exhibit that goes around to little neighborhood museums around the country. And these all have to be static maps because a lot of these local museums don't even have internet connections. And so we'll have a series of instructive maps that people can stop and study along with the displays that are in there, dealing with trail tiers, the forced migration from the slave trade. In 2014, we had the Wilderness 50th anniversary temporary exhibit, and we had a website associated with it. The museum, this particular exhibit is now closed, and we had a little story map set up dealing with the photos and also wilderness and context. And this got a lot of people interactive with the kiosks that we had on display. But then there were also some static maps dealing with particular wilderness area in Montana, dealing with Triple Divide Creek, where you got waters going to the three oceans, Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic. And then there's also this one of the Bisty Beast, which we had a dinosaur in that particular exhibit, and it just identifies where it comes from. Over in the American Indian Museum, I worked for a year developing the maps for that, and it opened in 2016. And this had a number of maps, including, the Inca road system had never been comprehensively mapped before, and so I had to deal with 40,000 kilometers worth of road system. And what people don't realize, though, is that you can zoom in on a number of these maps, and some of our archaeologists and scientists do zoom in with the data, and they can get more information on that. But then there are various walk-by maps of the cultures preceding the Inca Empire, and this is the four separate maps there, plus the early Cusco Valley, Inca, and then the four regions or provinces or whatever you want to call them of the empire. My favorite part of the exhibit is this, which I was not involved with, was put together by some archaeological architects, and this shows in 3D fashion how the city of Cusco was laid out in the shape of a puma. And you got the head there on the left. And I really like this, what they put together. It's a touch table that actually crashed a lot when it was first put up, because we get busloads of kids coming in and they start slapping away in it. And fortunately, they were able to override that and only allow up to 6 people at a time slap away at it. But it's been very popular. But then we also have some other walk-by maps that people can look at. At the same time this opened, we had the Folklife Festival dealing with Peru, and I put up this map showing where all the participants in the Folklife Festival came from. And every summer except for this summer because of the lousy shutdown that occurred last winter, we have different cultures from around the world, and again, it's always dealing with where they're coming from, and for different, each year deals with a different cultural tradition. In 2017, we had the Narwhal exhibit open up, and it dealt with the Narwhal, the Inuit people that live there, and climate change. And this is a relatively large map at the start of the exhibit, dealing with the distribution and shrinkage of ice in the Arctic. Come on, there we go. We also have, oops, go back. We also have this animated Arctic sea ice, and people can go and see this online, and it's quite nice. It shows the shrinkage of ice over time. We also have a map that people, with an extensive figure caption, that people can stop and study about all the industrial activity that's going on in the Arctic currently. And then regions and settlements. People don't, people are obviously aware of that it's sparsely settled, but there are quite a few settlements up there, and it's one thing we wanted to get across to people. And then we had a focus on a particular area, Pond Inlet. This map would have been considerably different had the exhibit opened a few months later, because the entire region off of Baffin Bay and just above Baffin Island, there was a legal agreement between the Inuit and the Canadian government to have no seismic blasting off there, and we would have had that included. Now, I even deal with the art galleries once in a while, and over in the Sackler Asian Art, we've got this 9-foot square map that shows up, it deals with the Buddhist monk back in the 1600s, I think it was, or 1500s, who traveled around southern and eastern Asia and the places all he visited. And we've got some kiosks there that you can deal with that. Outside of the exhibit, we've got this nice little label that I didn't come up with that, and I thought that was a nice thing for them to put up. We currently have the Outbreak exhibit, and that opened last year. Yes, I'm getting there. And then we have an interactive, the interactive ProMeds health map. And this gets updated on a daily basis. And there are all sorts of diseases and whatnot that are outbreaking around the world, and it's kind of, people get a big kick out of that. And then they can also get a little scared about traveling. But then we also have a couple static maps, because this opened in conjunction with the 100th anniversary of the Spanish flu, and we had this one static map dealing with the effects of the Spanish flu in Alaska. We also have an animated map showing the rise and fall of SARS and how easily it spread around the world, and given the air travel on our planet, wasn't surprising that happened. But fortunately, with vaccines that are developed, it came to an end pretty quickly. This year, I was involved with the American History Museum, and they asked me to develop this 16-foot wide map showing the state of the country as it existed at the time of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. And they wanted a big map. And this had to have the help from Esri to develop this. They had to go through ArcMap, and then go to ArcPro, and then go to Adobe Illustrator to develop this 2.5 gigabyte file of this map, because it was, I didn't want to have anything generalized, and then there was a couple of extra maps that people would look at, as well as showing existing trails and whatnot and all the American Indian groups, and I'm getting close to finishing. But the museum director overruled the curator and the exhibit staff and decided to have this map instead, because it's a historic map, and oh well, at least. Anyway, our fossil hall just opened this year, and they've got a series of maps showing different, dealing with Ronald Blakely's series of how the Earth looked at different time periods in the past, Cretaceous, Jurassic, showing here, and plus human footprint. A very popular map that's in the hall, actually this map was developed before the Dinosaur Hall ever opened. It was done in 2009 by me. The curator wanted it to continue. Well, they didn't plan, the exhibit staff did not plan on having room for it, so actually this map is on display next to the women's room, bathroom, instead of in the exhibit hall. But at least they saved it. Anyway, there you go.